Hello, here's your lesson 8 that we were going to talk about today in class. And you can have the video notes, so therefore you can go to Google Classroom and copy any that you could not get during my conversation here. So, first off, proportional relationships, it helps if it writes, proportional relationships have a constant ratio or unit rate. That constant ratio or unit rate is also known as the constant proportionality, which we've been working on the last few days. So we have this example here about a mother and a son going on a trip and everything else. You can read through it, but you'll see that they have a half a gallon left in the gas tank. All right, and the nearest gas station is 26 miles away. Your mother logs the gas records to know how far they drive and how many gallons, and that's right down here below in this table. So we need to find the constant proportionality. Well, as we know, we're going to take 224, divide by 8. Take 280, divide by 10, and 112 and divide by 4. Every single time you do that, you get an answer of 28. So, what does that mean? Explain what it represents. It means 28 miles per 1 gallon. So you get 28 miles for every gallon of gas. Now it says to write an equation that will relate this. So we want the word equation there. That means it's going to have an equal sign. We know the equation is y equals kx. That's what we're modeling. So in this case, the constant is the 28. That's that constant proportionality, the unit rate, just the number 28. What we have to put in here is what the y and the x will represent. And I'm actually going to go ahead and use gallons. I'm going to put G. And miles, I'm going to put M. So the number of miles that we're able to drive is equal to 28 times the number of gallons. So M equals 28G. Next, knowing that there's a half gallon left, how would we get that? So when we plug this in, there's a half gallon left. So we have M equals 28, and instead of gallons, we're going to put in a half of a gallon. So what is half of 28? The answer is 14. So, using that equation, how far will your mom be, so will she be able to make it to the nearest gas station? And the answer is no. You're going to be walking, because you know she's not going to walk, because 14 is less than the 26 miles to the nearest gas station. So therefore, the answer is no on that. Next, using that same equation, M equals 28G, how far can you travel on 18 gallons? So how far can you travel? So M equals 28, and instead of G for gallons, we're going to put in the 18. So that shows you just have to multiply. So M equals 28 times 18, which is 504 miles. So using that equation makes it pretty quick and easy to do. Next, using the equation again, how far can you make it, or how many gallons of gas is needed to go 750 miles? So in this case, we know the M. We know 750 miles equals 28 times the number of gallons, and that's what we got to figure out. This is a one-step equation, so you just divide by 28 and divide both sides by 28, and you get G equals 26 and 8/10 gallons. So 26.8 gallons. So that's page 1. Again, you can always go back on Google Classroom to look at this again. The next one shows a graph, and we want to look at certain points on this graph. All right, street artists in New Orleans that draw cartoon-like caricatures. Sorry, that's kind of a hard word to say. So we have 0, 0, we know that point, and that shows it's proportional. It's 0, 0, and it's a straight line. But you also want to look for where the points intersect, and I see this point right here. I also see this point right here, and this point right here. Those are the ones that are there, and if you look on your sheet real carefully, you will see those. So let's go ahead and mark those down. We have 0, 0, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 6, 9. So what does this mean? The first number, 0246, whatever, is the time, the number of hours. Comma, the 0369 is how many portraits she can draw. So that's what that means. Okay? Now, we want to write several equations on how to do this. Well, remember, y divided by x equals k. And we know each one of these. We never worry about 0, 0, but we're going to do 3 divided by 2 equals k. 6 divided by 4 equals k. And 9 divided by 6 equals k. So therefore, if you take the number of portraits, n, all right, again, I'm going to go up here. Notice how it says number of portraits is n, and the time spent is t. So n divided by t equals the k. Well, when you go ahead and divide each one of those, you get 3 divided by 2 is 1 1/2. 6 divided by 4, 1 1/2. 9 divided by 6, 1 1/2. So this is n over t equals 1 1/2, 1 5/10. Or, I'd rather kind of see it this way, all right, and that is n equals 1 5/10 times t, to mimic that y equals kx. Determine the constant proportionality. Constant proportionality is 1 5/10. And what does it mean? You could do 1 5/10 portraits per 1 hour. So again, there's that unit rate constant proportionality. For example 3, we're given this chart up above here. Which variable is the output? So we have gallons and we have miles driven. The output is always the one on the right-hand side. It is your variable of y, which in this case is miles driven. And actually it makes sense here, because you put gas into the car to be able to drive the car. All right, so it kind of makes sense with that as well. So y is your variable, and it's always on the right-hand side, which is your miles driven, and you put gas in to be able to drive miles. Next, we want to find out if it's proportional. So that means we got to go and take 62 divided by 2, you get 31. You take 124 divided by 4, get 31. 310 divided by 10, you get 31. So is it? Yes, it is. Now, your output is your miles equals 31 times the number of gallons. M equals 31G. The next few questions, I want you to pause, or the substitute will pause this for just a second. And I want you to really think about this, because this is what I was talking about, proportional relationships and reasoning and thinking of these things. In any ratio relating gallons and miles driven, will one of the values always be larger? If so, which one? So looking up here, will there be one of them that's always larger than the other? And you should be pausing it and then answering it. And the answer is yes. Which one is larger? Miles. Miles is always larger. And if you look at the table, you'll see that the number of miles is always larger than the number of gallons. If the number of gallons is known, can you find the miles driven? Explain how you calculate it. So again, if we know gallons, can we find out the number of miles? The answer is yes. And that is you multiply by 31. Because 31 is your constant of proportionality. If the number of miles driven is known, can you find the number of gallons consumed or used in the car? And again, I want you to think about it, but the answer is yes. And this time you're going to divide by 31. So just like the last couple of days, we've talked about, it's all about multiplication and division. So you're either going to multiply or divide. Now, the nice thing about it is because we know miles is always bigger, when we multiply or divide, we can check to see if our answer makes sense. So for instance, on this one, it says how many miles could be driven with 18 gallons of gas? How many miles? Well, I know that the miles is going to be greater than 18. So do I do 18 divided by 31 like we had on letter E? No. We want to do the number of miles equals 31 times 18. Therefore, you're going to get M equals, and you guys would have a calculator to figure this out, 558 miles. And that is larger than the 18 gallons. Well, what about if we want 18 miles? So how many gallons are used when we drive 18 miles? So in this case, the miles is known, and the number of gallons is not. So how do we do that? We're going to divide by 31. And therefore you get G equals, and this turns out to be a little questionable, but we're going to put 0 and 58 hundredths gallons. Okay, that's how many gallons is 0 and 58 hundredths. So therefore you see that one is definitely smaller than the number of miles, because again, miles is always larger. And how many miles have you driven when you have half of a gallon is used? So how many miles when half of a gallon is used? So again, M, we don't know, 31, and a half of a gallon is 1/2. So then we just go ahead and multiply. What's half of 31? Hopefully you got that. I heard you in the background got that. Very good. 15.5 miles. And I could go ahead and do miles here, but we do have the M, and that's what that stands for. All right, last page. Lesson summary. How do you find the constant proportionality? That's what we talked about. That's what your essential question was the last few days. Divide. To find the unit rate, you divide. All right? Make sure you divide. How do you write an equation? It's in the form of y equals kx. And you substitute in the constant of proportionality in place of k. So once you find that. And then what is the structure of proportional relationships equations, and how do we use them? X and y values are always left as variables. They're the unknowns. And when one of them is known, they are substituted into y equals kx to find the unknown using algebra, using one-step equations. All right, as a class, you can work together, and I want you to go ahead and do the problem set. The substitute has the answer key, so you can check it over with that. All right, so I know that this took 13 minutes, but you got time now to do it. And if you want to redo this, you can go online and go through Google Classroom. All right, have a good day, have a good weekend, assuming this one was recorded on a Friday.